Hello and welcome back to the Leadership and Learning podcast with On Target. You've got Sam Gladman here on my own this week because this week we are doing something a little bit different. A few weeks back, Mike and I were invited to be guests at the Brisbane Safety Differently book club. For those not familiar, these are monthly gatherings or thereabouts where safety and leadership people get together, have a couple of drinks, and genuinely wrestle with the big ideas in the field. Now, Mike and I don't have a book. It's just Mike and I, a room full of curious people, and about an hour of the most candid conversation we've had in a professional setting for quite a while. So, the recording you're about to hear was captured primarily for video. It is live, there's a bit of room noise, the occasional bit of colourful language, and all the energy of a crowd that was clearly not there for a quiet night. So if it sounds a little bit different to our usual format, that is because it well and truly is. We'd ask you to lean into it for this week, and if you do want a fuller picture, we have put the video up on our YouTube channel as well, with the link in the show notes below. So what made us want to share this? Well, honestly, it was the response that came that was genuinely well and truly overwhelming and beyond what we'd expected. The feedback from the people in the room approaching us afterwards, the LinkedIn post that we put up after, as well, was one of the most engaged things we put out this year, with people sharing content, talking about what they'd applied in their own workplaces and their own team members who had seen other versions of this video and put it into practice in their workplace. Was really, really humbling and pleasing. So this recording covers a whole bunch of things, including my war against root cause analysis, how we think you can instill debrief culture, and some very simple and easy takeaways. Anyway, it clearly hit a nerve, so we figured, well, let's just put the whole thing out as our podcast. It is raw, it's unfiltered, and that's pretty much exactly how the night went. So here we go.
Because you guys fly fighter planes, right? I mean, we have to talk to these guys, don't we? We really have to talk to these guys. So everybody, Sam Gladman and Mike Mason. So guys, since you don't have a book, what we're going to talk about? Oh, just tell us about yourselves.
We're good. I spent a lot of time talking about me. All right. So my name's Mike. All right. So if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, there's a few little pictures there that sort of give you a bit of an idea about where I come from. 20 years in the Royal Air Force. You can tell I've got a slightly funny accent as well. Probably a bit easier to understand than Steve. Yeah, I would say so.
Never been so offended.
Oh, yeah? Let's go. Let's go. I spent most of my time on frontline fighter squadrons, the Eurofighter Typhoon, the one on the top left, and the Harrier in the bottom right of that. And collage, that's kind of where I cut my teeth in the RAF. I spent 3 years on an exchange flying the F-18, which is the one in the bottom left corner. I met my now wife, so when my RAF career was over, it made sense for me to move back to sunny Australia rather than staying in the dreary UK. And I've now spent the last 5 years working with the Australian Defence Force, first of all teaching on the Hawk, which is the training aircraft in the top right, so teaching the next generation of fighter pilots their trade. But I've actually just left full-time defence, and I now teach in the F-35 simulator as a contractor, so teaching on that aeroplane, which is pretty cool. So that's quite good fun. Now, I first came across like human factors, human performance about 23 years ago. We did a course during my early days of flying training, and I thought, this is really cool. Really piqued my interest. It was really interesting. And I've always kind of had that passion for it ever since then, so 23 years ago. I am also quite a keen scuba diver. And if you're here, you probably heard of Gareth Locke. So Gareth's the founder of the Human Diver team, and I joined the Human Diver team about 7 years ago to sort of combine a passion for scuba diving with a passion for human factors with the experience that I've got from aviation. So that was where I came into that world. And I kind of realized quite quickly that while I thought I knew about human factors, I didn't really have a clue. And certainly learning from Gareth and my own learning as well, and reading and everything else, I've really taken it to new levels, and I've gone almost full circle. And now I take a lot of what I've learned from the human diver back into flying, into my professional life. And then Sam and I met a few years ago, and he'll tell you a bit more about that as well. But we've both got a bit of a passion. We're human factors nerds, and so we decided that we've got an option here to form something where we can bring our experience and our knowledge and what we can offer into the corporate world. So we formed On Target, and we bring all of that into the corporate space, and here we are tonight.
Sam, mate. Sam.
Hello. So clearly a fairly similar background, clearly not a weird accent to this room at least. I'll get everyone in the room. It's in the Aussie Air Force, flying F-18 Super Hornets based out of Amberley. Fire, apparently I don't. So I was lucky enough to do that in 2015, which was freaking epic. Even more epic when the bar shouted us drinks for the rest of the night, and the next day was less epic. But yeah, had a great time doing that career. I finished my flying time as an instructor of instructors, which was probably the most rewarding role in the Air Force. And as you know, this tangent of our careers would suggest, very much enjoy imparting knowledge and seeing that knowledge transfer and the aha moments and whatnot. And I think why I enjoyed instructing instructors most was because it did focus around soft skills, non-technical skills, not around, hey, you know, plane gets bigger, trees get bigger, trees get smaller. It was more like, here's how you have to watch the guy in the front who's trying to kill you, essentially, or girl in the front. Who got super interested, like Mike, in human factors, and did a bunch of safety roles in the Air Force as well while I was flying, and then eventually became a full-time air crash investigator in Defense Flight Safety Bureau. Did that for a few years. I did some human factors consulting on the side, and then a couple of years ago, I left the RAF. I'm now, my full-time job, as it were, the day job, is as the Chief Operating Officer for an international drone company, which is why there's a picture of me standing on a roof in Romania with a drone up there. And that's a few of our pilots. And what we're doing, well, this particular example is pathology samples and whatnot, medical transport via drone. So instead of getting your blood taken and a van takes it to the lab at the end of the day, they take it up onto the roof and a drone comes and picks it up and flies it, which is pretty cool, I think.
That is very, very cool. I didn't know we were doing these pictures, so that is absolutely brilliant. I do want to ask you both, so you obviously recognised that there was a bit of a gap in the market. What kind of training is it that you guys have got that you can bring to industry? So why did you see the gap in the market?
First, we saw that human factors and non-technical skills is about people, right? And what we find more and more as we teach this across industries is that people are the same. People make the same mistakes across industries. And the same skills that make an effective frontline supervisor in a mining site are the same skills that make an effective leader in a freaking law firm. We've done law firms, accounting firms, and people, we hear the same things. It's like, well, I delegated this task and they came back to me and it was shit. So what do I do? I was like, well, that's a you problem, not a them problem. And to come back to your point, I always open our brief saying this, and I can never not think of Taken movie now, but Mike and I have a very specific set of skills. And the kind of blurb we talk about is that we don't pretend to be better at leadership or teamwork or non-technical skills than anyone out there, but we have not only some academic knowledge between us and qualifications, we've also actually lived it as frontline workers in our own fairly critical concept. It's our own fairly critical application, but we've also taught it. So we kind of think of it as a bit of a triangle of, we've got the academic experience, we've actually lived it and breathed it and been the ones on the front line who go, what the fuck, management? Like, do you actually think that's how it works? And the final kind of piece is also, we're very big on lived experience, and actually, like, you don't learn to drive a car by having a PowerPoint presentation and then go and jump in the car and get your license. So why do we put people in leadership positions and say, go lead? And why do you suck at it? Go lead, be better. I'll stop talking and give Mike a chance.
Yeah, well, mate, I'll ask you a different. Yeah, I'll give you your own question, mate. Really. So, what does aviation do with failure that industry doesn't? Like, we're all safety on normal jobs, not like you guys have got. Really, what does aviation do with failure that we can really tap into and learn from?
I think something to be aware of is that aviation is put on a pedestal of excellence. I don't think that's entirely valid for what it's worth. I think aviation led the charge back in the 70s after the Tenerife disaster and things like that. And they first identified the human factor and what we need to do as humans to improve, because the machines are actually quite good now. However, the rest of the world's caught up. Aviation hasn't necessarily lagged behind, but it's still not ahead of the pack. So I think aviation is good, but it's not necessarily better than a lot of other industries. What aviation does do well, there's probably two things, certainly in the military. Consistency. So generally, aviation will consistently, across different countries, different commercial, military, whatever, they will do their best to apply standards, encourage a decent reporting culture and a safety culture, and look to constantly improve. I think aviation does that consistently, whereas a lot of other industries perhaps don't do it as well within those industries. The other thing that I think aviation does quite well is, certainly in the military, is learn from near misses. So we'll do a lot of work on things that almost happened, where aeroplanes almost collided. And it might just be for trend analysis. You might just literally come back from a flight where we've done some air combat training and we've gotten closer than we should have done in accordance with our rules and our brief. And you think, well, that's not very cool. Let's just note that down so it goes in the system. So if there's a trend, people can actually have a closer look. All the way to you have a near miss where you weren't expecting to. And this happened to me maybe 3 or 4 years ago, where it was me and 2 other airplanes in a simulated environment. And I was looking at one airplane and I thought, where's the other airplane? Whoosh. And I missed him, but it was just sheer fluke. He didn't know I was there. We were about 300 feet apart, which sounds pretty far, but in fast jets, that's about as close as you ever want to get. And I had about half a second to react. And I think if we'd been on a collision course, I probably wouldn't have had time to react and would have killed each other. Now, that kind of thing, aviation really digs into, or military aviation digs into that in real detail to look at individual factors, systemic factors. What can we change as a system to try and make sure that doesn't evolve into an actual collision where people actually die? I don't think the real world, I don't think commercial aviation necessarily looks into near misses as well. And I don't necessarily think the wider world looks into near misses as consistently as it should, because they're often, an actual accident is often just the tip of the iceberg. There's all the other near misses that happen before that. So that's what I would say that aviation
No.
like.
Awesome, mate. And as someone who's just about to go to Korea in the next couple of weeks, I'm glad that you gave me that confidence that the flying in airlines is not as safe as it could be. Oh, yeah. But mate, I'd love to ask you, Sam, just what's something that we know about aviation that 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 you guys used to really believe to be true, and that we can really is obviously evolved over time. We've probably touched on a wee bit of it, but I'd be keen to understand what you think is what was a held belief in aviation that you're now realising has been debunked?
There's a lot to that, and there's lots of them. And I think, to Mike's point, aviation has been through the same evolution that from the outside I see a lot of critical industry or safety critical industry going through now, where in the shift away from blaming the person. But again, aviation still kind of sucks at it. Aviation doesn't suck at it. Aviation still has room to move. And I don't want to just rag on the US Air Force constantly here. They have a lot of room to move. But what's something we do now?
Root cause analysis.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm going to be here for hours now. We've moved away from root cause analysis.
That was supposed to be your cue to go, oh, can you put that in?
So, I mean, maybe just a straw poll. Who uses root cause analysis in their fields at the moment? It's here. Okay, good. Yeah, perfect.
Other question?
So one of my favorite questions I like to ask when someone in a complex industry or workplace says, yeah, no, we found the root cause. And I go, okay, cool. Well, what was the root cause of it going right? And they're like, oh, well, there are heaps of factors. You can't pin it to one thing why the whole thing worked well. I'm like, oh, interesting. Pause to let that sink in. So yeah, I'm really very passionate about, like, root cause is just where you stopped looking. And in the complexity of the environments in which we're all operating, I think I'm preaching to the choir here, I'm sure, you're kind of stifling your learning by looking for a root cause. And if it is a single strand of causal pathway, then keep pulling the root cause and you'll get back to, as Mike says, Adam and Eve. And I think there's just too many tangents, too many complexities and contributing factors to the way things go wrong at the moment, that in industries like, I assume those are all in this room, a root cause is a falsehood.
Mate, yeah, put that caveat in. I'm going to be tapping into both of you for this one.
Okay.
So we do blame, and I don't think organisations have moved away from blame. Just wondering what advice you would have for me and people in this room, and on how we can have those conversations with our leaders about we need to actually look a bit deeper into this rather than just think about the person. I've moved away from the questions, boys, and all. Sorry.
That's good. No, that's all right. There are loads of ways you can think about doing that. One thing that I think is quite important to get across is that as soon as you try and tell somebody that what they're doing is wrong and what we're doing is right, you're just never going to get anywhere. So a lot of it is about the breadcrumbs. Sam's point about root cause analysis, where you might sort of say, what's the root cause of things going right? And they go, oh, actually, I see what you're getting at now. It's kind of like drawing other parallels to hope that people will see what you're saying is perhaps a good way of thinking about it. That's a pretty good way to start. To try and change things from underneath is hard, though. You've got to get the leaders to buy in as a general rule. But we've talked a lot about followership over the last couple of days where we've been doing the class. And if you can set the example as a follower, as a team member, and other people follow your example, that has an impact. That affects the culture. Other people will like what you're doing, and that will grow. It'll take time, but that's certainly a big aspect to it. I think a lot of it is about the language as well. So we've talked a bit about it's not necessarily what you say, but how you say it. You can try and get the same message across, but there are several ways to do so. Words mean worlds is quite a good phrase that I like to use. And it's just to do with making something about us or we rather than you or I. That just those little things. You're still trying to get the same intent, but it's really, really powerful. How can we improve rather than how can you improve? Things like that.
Yeah, words mean worlds. Is 100% bang on. Actually, it's something I'm talking about just now. You know, how do we completely eradicate some of the language that we've been using and change it? Sam, same sort of thing about investigations.
Yeah.
How can we take that systems approach to it, like the systems lens, and how hard is that to do for organisations like ours?
I think it's super hard, and it's hard because as humans and as organizations, we love to focus on the last person to touch it, right? Before it fucked up. And I think for starters, that's a good way to think of it. Oh, you were just the last one to touch it. You were the one that happened to be on the shift that day, as opposed to Larry, what the hell, mate? Like, sort it out. In terms of, I guess, cultural shift, as everyone knows, it's not one person comes in and changes a culture. It's a whole bunch of things. But sorry, from the investigation point, the other thing I wanted to bring out is I think if you sit down in a room with someone and, you might ask the 5 whys or do something like that. As soon as you say, even with the best intent, hey, and I'm curious, why did you do that? It immediately gets you defensive, right? And their response might be truthful, but it'll be justifying their actions. And so something I used to use and would advocate for is ask, what were the cues that led you to make that decision? And it immediately takes it off the person and takes it to, I think, oh, well, I saw this, and it makes them far less defensive. And actually, it's way more informative to you as the person, whether you're conducting a debrief or you're talking to someone after, you're just in the office and the product didn't come back as you expected. You just go, oh, well, can you tell me, what you were thinking at that point?
Yeah, oh, mate, I love that. Actually, when Hugh's here at the back, and he hears me say this 100 times. I wonder how that made sense for that to happen. I really love that. What were the cues? What were the drivers of that? Mate, that's really good. I really would love to chat to you both about the briefing process. It seems to be that the armed forces do that really, really well. And then you can ask your question. All right.
That was an
Skill
apology for the illegitimate children downstairs. Unattributed.
I'm divorced now. I can do what I like.
So I have to paraphrase the question.
Yeah. Thanks. I'm going to paraphrase both to check my own understanding. But are you asking, if we're not approaching it from a blame or root cause analysis, how are we approaching the investigation? Is that right? Or yeah, sure. Educational, I think, probably. So even within the Defence Force, when I was doing that job, and the thing that comes to mind is, like, one of the hardest interviews I did was less than 24 hours after some, well, you would have seen in the news, a helicopter crashed up off Whitsundays. So I was the lead interviewer, or the lead of the team that went to interview the crews immediately afterwards. And that was, emotionally challenging and whatnot, and they're all pretty emotionally charged, both with them and the wider squadron, or the wider flying community that, all the maintainers and everyone that supports that flying activity, was an education as to why we were there and why we were asking the questions we were asking. And that was a chance to talk about, we're not here to blame. We're trying to make sure that, this is another bent of mine, we're not trying to make sure that that same thing doesn't happen again, because the complexity of the system, those same conditions won't present themselves again. But we're trying to make sure that we can present more resilience in our system so that when something equivalent to that happens, we've got better barriers in place, I suppose. Yeah, does that go towards your answer? Not really? Yeah. I say I'm the senior ranking officer and you will tell me. No.
Wait, how do you go in with that bias?
You don't.
No, I was just gonna say, like I was kind of wondering, as like a professional investigator, how do you go in with that bias?
I don't think you can. And I think if you acknowledge that going in, that's half the battle won. I have, despite knowing it's what not to do and everything and telling others not to do it, do as I say, not as I do. One of my first investigations as you kindly put it, professional investigator, was back from my own Hornet squadron. And my immediate reaction was, what the fuck? Like, seriously, Greels? Did you do that? Sorry, Greels. Edit that out. Yeah, look, to answer your question, I think acknowledge that you will have biases and keep an eye out for them.
Love it.
And then get someone else to look over it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing, right? Because I hear that all the time. Oh, no, I won't be biased. I'll definitely be fair. And right away, that's cute. You go, this guy's going to be biased. Yes, 100% will. Josh is just like, oh, you were going to ask that question about the debrief. Right. Well, mate, cute. I know that's something that you guys do very, very well. Like the debrief, the pre-work briefs and the debriefs.
Yep.
Kind of wonder if you can talk us through that and help us make sense of it.
Okay. I think a key thing to effective briefing and debriefing is structure. So you have a routine to go through. That's relatively easy with a brief because you're going to go through what you think is about to happen, regardless of whether it actually happens or not. So you can go through a timeline that you're expecting to actually manifest. With a debrief, that's a bit more challenging because now you're looking at what actually happened, which may not be what you expected. And like Sam's talking about, you want to have this curiosity about what made sense for you to make those decisions at the time, what conditions were present, et cetera, et cetera. There's loads of little avenues you can go down. And debriefing, as we've discovered over the last couple of days, I think, with the people in our class, it is an art. It is a challenge. But a lot of that comes back to consistency. We do it all the time. So we brief and debrief every time we go flying. And because you do it all the time and it gets consistent, it becomes habitual, it becomes normal, and you get much better at it. And a lot of it is to do with having the right culture where people are willing to speak up. So psychological safety is a very well-known phrase and concept in this day and age. And we certainly will do that. We'll do what we can to promote psychological safety as part of our briefing and debriefing process. And something I will often sort of highlight is by far the most credible fighter pilots that I've ever worked with are the ones that put their hands up at the start of a debrief and say, today I messed up this, this, and this. And you just sit back and go, oh, thank God. They talked about their mistakes. Now I can talk about mine. And it all adds up and it all digs into the learning. But I guess there are there's lots of different mechanisms you can use. Root cause analysis, we do steer away from now because it does lead you down the line of once you found it, well, that's it. That's an easy thing to fix. Now we try and focus on, well, this was the outcome. So that's a key part to it, certainly from a debriefing point of view, what actually happened, get truthful information, which is a bit easier in aircraft because it's all recorded. And then you dig into, right, well, what led to that happening? What decisions were made? What was people's situation awareness at the time? That's really key. What was people's situation awareness? If it was X when it should have been Y, well, that's interesting. Let's dig into that. So there's lots of stuff you can go into.
How do you make sure that information is not lost? How's it recorded and distributed?
As in the results of the debrief?
Yeah.
It depends, like a lot of things. If it's a safety incident, then that information will get captured in the military sort of flight safety reporting system, which is actually quite accessible, quite easy to use, and therefore other people can look at that and dig into that as needs be. If it's a kind of tactical lesson, then if tactics need to be updated, then the tactical manuals would be updated and the changes will get promulgated. So it kind of varies, but we want to try and do it as efficiently as possible.
Jump in, mate. Jump in if you've got something to say. This is really good stuff.
These guys at the front will know how annoyingly passionate we are about debriefing. To take that one step further, something we taught these guys today is we talk about how often do you have whatever you call it, an after action report or whatever. And we go, oh yeah, we need to do this, this, and this better next time. It's like, great, yeah, we do. Okay, should we go to lunch? And we go out. So we don't call them lessons learned, we call them lessons identified. And they're not learned until they're put into the system somehow. And the way they get put into the system is by creating accountability there. And we use an acronym called CACA, and it's a contract. Who am I making accountable for, hey, you need to update that SOP, 300 knots was a bit too slow for that rejoin, or whatever the equivalent might be. When it's done, I want you to let me know, and we're going to need to communicate that to everyone else. So there's a contract of what has to be done, who has authority, who owns it. The third C is elusive communication. How's it going to be communicated to the wider community and then go beyond just that single individual's head, and action, and what's going to happen afterwards, basically. But it's just so easy, especially when you're the person running a debrief or whatever it is, to be like, man, I am swamped, but I've just said, hey, we need to do this. And then I've kind of cognitively deloaded it, right? It's off my to-do list, but then it just disappears into the ether. So yeah, identify the lesson, but then make sure someone is responsible for implementing that lesson, and then you get a lesson learned, not a lesson identified.
I've actually, like, maybe you guys have sort of tapped into this already, but I made a note here about what does a really good conversation about risk sound like when you're in the And then RAAF, like you guys are.
I would say a good conversation is not a typical conversation. The RAAF is quite guilty of operating in silos, which is common across a lot of industries. I'm sure we're aware. When it comes to having a good conversation, it's looking at things from a systemic approach. So a quite good example actually that I've come across in my flying instructional role on the Hawk aircraft was we had a trend of what we called altitude busts. So where you're climbing up, you're going to level at a certain height, but you'd actually go through that height. And that is a potential safety issue if there's another airplane above you. And we looked into why that was happening. And one of the contributing factors was often you get talked at on the radio by air traffic control just prior to leveling off. So it's a distraction. And a lot of people say, well, don't get distracted. And you're like, I've got an idea. Why don't you remove the distraction? Because we are humans and we get distracted. That's just humans. So that's when you might want to go outside of your silo and have a good conversation about risk and talk to air traffic control and say, hey, what's your thought process while this is happening? You know, where are you looking? What are you thinking? What's your priorities? And see what their version of events is or their version of doing things is. And then you can have a good risk conversation and work out where the line is, what you can take forward, what you can change, both in your silo and what they can change in their silo to move forward as a system for the better. And we're not too bad at that. Like I say, that would be a good conversation, not a normal conversation.
Can you guys kind of, I mean, obviously, I believe there's some stramash happening in the Middle East just now. Again, happy to cut this out if you guys can't really talk about it. But you both operate at the edge of the envelope, right? You know, like things. I'm sure there's things being fired at you. How do you keep that concentration? How do you keep yourself in? Oh, it's such a cliche, but in the zone.
We have slightly different answers to this question, I think. Yeah. My answer, probably biased by my combat experience, if we take that to be the leading edge of this, is that you kind of don't and you kind of can't, I think. Again, like physiology and psychology says that you can't. So again, be aware of that going in. But as we've spoken about loosely, the missions when I was in Iraq were very long. We're doing 10 hours strapped to a seat with no cushioning, which is not comfortable. And so what you really have to do is identify when is it acceptable to kind of let my attentional guard down. Also, at the same time, and without stepping into Mike's area, you've got to kind of keep your brain ticking at the same time. And so I think as you get more experience, you identify, hey, what can I load shed at the moment? And isn't it appropriate time to load shed that to give myself a little bit of a chance to catch up? And especially knowing when that's appropriate, but also knowing when it's about to stop being appropriate and when, the cues, I guess, that come with experience that, hey, we're ramping up here and we're going to be talking to guys on the ground soon. Yeah, so give yourself little micro breaks, I guess is my answer.
Yeah, amazing.
Well, a really good way to keep your brain busy in a fighter aircraft with one seat is to actually go for a pee. Yeah, that takes quite a lot of cognitive effort. Because you've got a safety ejection seat, you've got to unstrap, you've got to kind of manipulate oneself. That's a bit of a challenge. So that keeps your brain busy. The other thing with a lot of modern aircraft is you've got quite a lot of sensors on board. You've got a radar, you've got a targeting pod, you might have infrared track. You've got all these other things to just sort of to fiddle with, basically. So if you've got nothing to do, and a lot of the time in combat, you have got nothing to do. Like it sounds really cool, and all the stuff you see on Top Gun, it looks really cool. And all the stuff you see on TV looks really cool because they're just showing you the good bits. And most combat missions, Sam will back me up, you'll do a 10-hour mission and a lot of that is just flying in a straight line or flying in a circle, waiting for something to happen. Now, when something does happen, it's pretty cool. But up until that point, it can be quite boring. So you want to try and keep yourself busy. And there's often not a lot of stuff to do. So yeah, operating the sensors, getting the airplane to do something so you can actually just keep your fingers and thumbs going, try the muscle memory going, go for a pee, have something to eat. Any little thing you can do to keep your brain busy is a challenge. One of the, a bit of a tangent, but one of the, if you like, a known thing where you're going to get bored rather than combat, when we're taking airplanes long transits, whether it be across the ocean to America, where we go on exercise quite a lot, you'll be with an air-to-air refueling tanker and you'll probably refuel, I don't know, half a dozen times on the transit to Hawaii or something. It's about a sort of 8-10 hour flight. It's not particularly fast. And when you're flying in a straight line, the view's not exactly brilliant. It's just the deep blue ocean. What we'll often do over the radio is just have a quiz, stuff like that. Because that keeps your brain functioning. And it sounds a bit like you have a quiz while you're flying a fighter plane, but it keeps your brain in gear. And it's great. It's a great idea to stop you getting bored. Because there was a really, if you like, safety report from the Royal Air Force. This is going back 30 years now. But a formation of jets with a tanker over the Atlantic somewhere, going from the UK to North America, and one of the airplanes just flew into another airplane because they're just so bored that they're just not concentrating on what they're doing anymore. And when you listen to the radio transcripts, one aircraft, I think one of the aircraft broke up and the crew ejected quite quickly. The other one was still flyable. But when you listen to the transcripts, it takes quite a while for the crew to actually cognitively catch up with what's happening because they've just been so zoned out. So the more things you can do to keep your brain in gear, even if it's just having a quiz, it'll
You guys must go crazy if you see something like worker was complacent.
Yeah. I got
Because I talk about this all the time, and again, Shoes up the back, he'll tell you this, right? I go, like, you are hardwired to be complacent. I hate that word, but I hear it so many times. It's just like, hey, that's your brain just saying, hey, I need a rest, I need a break. You know, like, I didn't even know you spent that long on that. Yeah, it's just amazing. That is just incredible. This is for myself. I'm asking this question. I was going to leave this to the end, but you've got to be so excited. As someone who's just purchased a motorcycle, and I can ride a motorbike. But I haven't had one for about 18 years. What advice would you give to me to keep me in the zone and not have quizzes? But for these windy sort of tracks, sort of stuff, I'd be keep. I mean, you guys must ride motorbikes as well, then? No?
I've got a bike license. It's been a few years.
Same for me too, mate. So I jumped on this. I was like, oh, this will be easy. Boom, 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 boom. And I was like, oh shit, I've actually forgotten how to ride a bike. So that's why I asked that question. What advice would you have for me that how do I have to keep myself in the zone?
I'd say buy health insurance. But...
Funny enough, I'm booked in next Friday for a while.
Have you ever done California Superbike School? I'd recommend that because that's where they take you on a track, but they don't necessarily teach you to ride faster. They teach you to ride better, and you get an awful lot of skills out of that. So that's a pretty good idea. I genuinely recommend California Superbike School just to sort of learn how to get more out of a bike, but how to do it effectively as well. Ride better. What I would say though is, I mean, you're never going to get your reflexes any faster. You're never going to get your brain and your reaction time any quicker. The good news is you've got quite a few years of experience at life, and you'll know that things on the road are out to kill you. You know, every car is out to kill every motorcyclist. That's just a biological fact.
Yeah, it makes me a better rider, actually. It makes me a better driver. People are going to kill me.
Yeah. Because that all adds up to feed into your biases, and so you'll be naturally more inclined, subconsciously perhaps, to look for potential hazards. What's actually going to kill me? What's going to happen next? Because you can't speed up your reaction times, but your experience can help you recognize situations before you need to react quickly.
Awesome, mate. Right, time for some audit. You will never get the opportunity to talk to these guys again, I'm pretty sure, unless you go to the horses. All right, there must be some questions out there. So much, but actually, we could call that out to when we post this on LinkedIn. What do you guys do to avoid distraction? The first time I've ever said this. Put it in the comments and tell us what you do to avoid distraction. Yeah, like and share.
CA.
Yeah.
Street in Queensland went through a number of fatalities. They suggested that everyone adopt HRO thinking. And the example they always used was an aircraft carrier. It looks like absolute chaos. My guess is it's not. It's actually an organised. Is that how it feels when you're on deck?
Yeah, I'd say it's highly organised. Yeah, the aircraft carriers I've flown off, the Royal Navy ones, are a little bit simpler than your big American super carriers, but it is a very well organised machine. You know, the airplanes are parked in a certain way and have to go off in a certain way. You're staring at one particular person for a particular phase of taxi or landing. Yeah, generally, yeah. You've got particular people, and the way the Americans do it is have different coloured jackets, so like red jackets, yellow jackets, etc., and they have different roles and different responsibilities. Certainly in the Royal.
So no, all I was going to ask is, what is the funniest call sign that both of you have interacted with in your careers? Who had the worst call sign and where did it come from?
I've got one. Go on. You might need to edit this out.
A few moments later.
All right, happy days. You know, we'll appear in these videos and we'll be like really bloody orange, right? Hey guys, like what's something that aviation what's something that construction, mining, oil and gas could do tomorrow that you guys could recommend that we probably don't do?
Tomorrow that you currently don't do.
Yeah, what's something from aviation that we should probably be doing and not normal companies, if that's a thing?
I'm going to sound like an absolute broken record and say instill some level of routine expected debrief with a standard structure into your operations. If we're assuming we're talking about, I guess, frontline safety critical work, be it an end of shift sort of thing. I think it got to the point where it was so cultural and expected in our world that it literally felt wrong to not do a debrief afterwards. Specifically, like when you was their final flight and they've just qualified as a fighter pilot or Super Hornet, like the years of training is over, and then it's like we're going to the bar, and no, we don't debrief this one. I tell you passed, and we carry on. But I think, yeah, if you can normalize it and just make it routine, and it doesn't need to be long either. And I said this today. One of the very simple questions you can ask can be like, "Hey, what surprised you today? What happened that wasn't expected?" And let's just take that. Let's spend 5 minutes with that, and that's all it needs to be. It doesn't need to be War and Peace on, yeah. Because if you identify that something surprised someone and why it surprised them, then you've probably got some pretty handy lessons coming out there.
How do you guys train? What kind of training do you have to do?
It's quite a gradual process. It's very much crawl, walk, run. And I think the way that you try and prepare for the dynamic situations that we encounter, you start off by reading the material. Then you get briefed on the material you've just read to confirm your understanding. Then you'll what we call chair fly it. So you'll actually sit in a chair, perhaps a bit like this one, and you'll practice moving your hands and feet, looking out the window where you're expecting to look, to try and build those muscle memories, or build the muscle memory up so that you can better prepare when you fly. We'll go in the simulator. The flight simulators these days are really quite high fidelity, so they can prepare you for what's going to happen. And then generally when you're flying, you'll normally have an instructor either with you in the aeroplane or in another aeroplane monitoring you. So it's a very sort of gradual process. But ultimately, as we've gone on about quite a bit tonight rather, when we come back, we debrief so that we can actually really dig into what happened. Did it reflect what we wanted to happen? If not, why not? We'll look at things that went well as well. We do actually try and focus on those things. But it's important that you look at the deviations from what we wanted to happen and look to what you can improve next time. So you're never going to be perfect, and we're just constantly trying to improve that process in an iterative manner.
Awesome, mate. I posted about you guys on LinkedIn probably a week or two ago, but it did make me curious about do you do normal safety training, like manual handling stuff? And how do your safety teams deal with people like you who are so trained and know more about risks than what they'll ever experience in their life? More than I'll ever experience.
Caveat, I've been out of the Air Force for a couple of years, but it was really interesting to see, and I'll throw him under the bus here as, you were still aircrew, weren't you? So as a loadie, yeah. It was interesting to see, I think aircrew being the closest ones to touching the airplanes had the aviation kind of safety experience and maturity. And then even just in the time that I was in the Air Force, it was interesting to see from the maintenance side that it was actually still relatively immature and introducing what they were called PBED, plan, brief, execute, debrief, which must admit I'm forgetting your questions. Safety training. We still have to do like that.
Because what I was thinking about, it's like, I wonder if these guys get told they have to wear gloves when or they have to wear their safety glasses and stuff like that. But do you ever go, what a wanker?
To you?
No. Oh, mate, that happens to me every day.
Honestly, it's part of what maybe was the seed of what started this between Mike and I. It's like the lights are dim. And
no, we're going to have candles. I feel like we're going to have a romantic moment.
Was generally like we're kind of sick of pretty average training. And, especially human factors, non-technical skills, and leadership being a part of that. It was like, we go and spend hours in the sim to focus on the technical abilities. And then you give us a couple of PowerPoint briefs every 1 or 2 years on non-technical skills. And it's like, okay, box ticked, go on. And then you look at all of our incidents, our database of incidents and accidents. And what's the contributing factor? It's not technical skills. It's all non-technical skills.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. Mate, I'm going to ask, the only reason I'm going to look at these questions is, I can't read them because I forgot my glasses. I was going to ask you if there was something that you could remove that we probably deal with every single day. If there was some kind of safety thinking that we could remove that you've experienced, what would that be?
What I would really like to see become normal, not debriefing this time, is that when something goes wrong, a lot of people, a lot of organizations will get to, they broke the rules, case closed. That's the start of where you want to be looking. I think that's a really important starting point, not a stopping point. So that's what I'd like to see more organizations do more of. If they find rules have been broken, great. Why? What were the conditions? What was the awareness? Why did people think that breaking the rules was the right thing to do? It might have been for, recklessness, for personal gain, but that's pretty rare in modern high-risk industries. So I think that we should be looking far further than they broke the rules. That's what I'd like to see change.
So that's a wrap on the Brisbane Safety Differently Book Club. A massive thanks to Josh, Steve, and the team for having us, and to everyone in the room that night who asked really good questions and came up and engaged with us afterwards. So if this one got you thinking, please share it with someone who still believes that root cause is where the story ends. And if you haven't already, come and find us on LinkedIn. That's where the majority of our conversation happens between these episodes. Where you can also head to our website and follow links to the blog, and you'll get weekly insights through emails there. We'll be back next week. And until then, I hope you go and debrief something. Have a great one.